Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It's midnight now here in Cairo, and this is a new edition of Panorama News. In the upcoming 45 minutes, we bring you the latest of the political, economic and sports news happening all around the world. I'm Hani Saif. I'll be bringing you the political and economic news for tonight, but we'll start off with the political segment, and the headlines lead the way. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi addresses the UN Climate Summit. Egyptian expats start voting in the runoff round of the second phase of the parliamentary elections. And US President Obama pushes for calm in angry Russia-Turkey row. Welcome back. The news in details. Heads of states and governments from 150 countries opened the biggest ever climate summit Monday in Paris, tasked with inking a historic deal to stave off disastrous global warming. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi addressed the opening session of the summit. In his speech, the president called for reaching a just and clear agreement for facing the climate change. The president called for reaching a binding agreement on the joint responsibility between developed and developing countries to alleviate the negative effect of climate change. Here's the full speech.
His Excellency President of the French Republic, Excellencies, heads of state and government, Mr. Secretary General of the United Nations, Mrs. Secretary General of the UNFCCC. Ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, I would like to thank His Excellency the French President for the kind invitation, hospitality and organization of this conference. I also wish to express my condolences to the leadership and people of France for the victims of the vicious terrorist attacks in Paris, and we reiterate our strong condemnation of these attacks and the full solidarity of Egypt with France in our common fight against all kinds of terrorism. We are facing a crucial juncture in our international endeavor, as all of our peoples are watching us and hoping that this conference proves to be a turning point in achieving our common goal to secure a better future for humanity and protect the rights of the next generations.
And our efforts will never be complete in this regard without reaching an international agreement that will strongly confront climate change and achieves the aspired balance between socio-economic development and protecting the environment, and also provides better circumstances to realize international peace and security. Ladies and gentlemen, Egypt has played and is still playing a constructive role in different negotiation rounds on climate change, reaching our conference where we are today out of Egypt's responsibility to represent the African continent and out of the unity, to represent the unity of the African continent. All African countries speak the same voice to defend the interests of the continent and achieve the aspiration and the prosperity for its people. The African continent is the continent that contributes less to climate change and the one that is most affected by its impact. This is why we need to have cooperation between African countries and least developed countries, and also small countries that are made up of small islands. We need to reach a clear agreement that should be binding to us all, which is based on sharing burdens and responsibilities between developed and developing countries within the framework of shared responsibility to address this challenge. Indeed, the aspired allocations of funds should be balanced. It is not acceptable to only focus on reduction of harmful emissions without giving equal attention to other elements, especially the ones related to building the capacities of developing countries to adapt to climate change. Also, we need to provide technical and technological support, and this agreement should have a global target for adaptation, and it should also have a commitment of not having global temperature of more than 1.5 centigrade, and that developed countries should be responsible towards developing countries in a way that will enable developing and African countries to reduce harmful emissions and achieve sustainable development. A report that was issued recently by the United Nations Environmental Program indicated that approximately 12 billion US dollar is needed every year until the year 2020, and this figure is very much expected to increase in order to tackle the damages and the harms made by climate change. And we need to exert all efforts to reach a sustainable agreement that has a commitment to make available 100 billion US dollar by 2020 to developing countries, and to double this amount after 2020. That was the framework under which African countries tailored two main initiatives. One of them is relevant to using renewable energies, and the other initiative is to the efforts of the adaptation made by African countries. And I here call upon international and regional organizations to provide all the support needed to these two initiatives. I also call upon the international community to support the efforts made by Egypt at the national level in this regard. Egypt and all African countries fulfilled their commitments to provide their contributions and their national plans that are ambitious in order to face climate change. Before this conference, Egypt adopted a comprehensive sustainable development national plan up till 2030. Ladies and gentlemen, despite of the difficulties of the challenges that we are facing, I'm fully confident that we have the wisdom and the solidarity which is enough to overcome all these challenges in a way that will enable us to achieve a historical achievement in the march of global developmental work in order to provide a brighter future for our people and for the future generations. Thank you very much, and peace be upon you all.
On the sidelines of the summit, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi met on Monday with French President François Hollande. The talks covered bilateral relations and means of boosting economic cooperation, as well as efforts to combat terrorism. The President also met with UN Chief Ban Ki-moon for talks on a number of regional and international issues, including the situation in the Middle East and efforts to restore peace and means of achieving sustainable development and efforts to alleviate the negative effect of climate change. Meanwhile, President el-Sisi met with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. After their meeting, presidential spokesman Ala Yusuf said that the president asserted the high priority Egypt is giving to the Palestinian cause and its support to the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people. The president also stressed that Egypt is continuing with its efforts to achieve a fair and comprehensive settlement to the Palestinian-Israeli stalemate on the basis of the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as the capital. On his part, Abbas praised Egypt's role in this context and its regional and international contacts to provide protection to the Palestinian people and push forward the resumption of the stalled peace negotiations. Addressing the opening session of the UN Climate Summit, French President François Hollande said that the fight against terrorism and global warming are closely linked. He noted terrorism and global warming are two big global challenges. 2 weeks after deadly Daesh terrorist attacks in the French capital, Hollande also reiterated that any deal to try to keep any further rise in global temperatures down to 2 degrees centigrade needed to be universal, differentiated and binding, with rich countries contributing more than poor ones. Meanwhile, UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon called on world leaders to accelerate action to avert a dangerous rise in temperatures. UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon warned that climate-related disasters are taking an ever greater toll on the poor and can wipe out decades of development gains, as he launched a global partnership to boost the resilience of vulnerable communities. The impacts of climate change, from intensifying droughts and floods to sea level rise, are strengthening as ecosystems and food and water supplies come under increasing pressure.
World leaders launched an ambitious attempt on Monday to hold back the Earth's rising temperatures, with French President François Hollande saying the world was at breaking point in the fight against global warming. Some 150 heads of state and government, including U.S. President Barack Obama and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping, urged each other to find common cause in 2 weeks of bargaining to steer the global economy away from its dependence on fossil fuels. They arrived at United Nations climate change talks in Paris, accompanied by high expectations and armed with promises to act. After decades of struggling negotiations and the failure of a summit in Copenhagen 6 years ago, some form of landmark agreement appears all but assured by mid-December. Most scientists say failure to agree on strong measures in Paris would doom the world to ever hotter average temperatures, bringing with them deadlier storms, more frequent droughts, and rising sea levels as polar ice caps melt. Facing such alarming projections, the leaders of nations responsible for about 90% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions have come bearing pledges to reduce their national carbon output through different measures at different rates. Over the next 2 weeks, negotiators will hammer out the strongest international climate pact yet. The deal will mark a momentous step in the often frustrating quest for global agreement.
Egyptian expats voted in the runoff round of the second phase of the parliamentary elections. The ballot boxes in a number of Egyptian embassies and consulates closed in their scheduled time in the first day of the runoff round of the elections, while others were still receiving voters according to the local time of each country. Ambassador Hamdi Loza, Assistant Foreign Minister assigned with the elections abroad, said that the voting process went on smoothly with no registration to any technical or security problems. Expats vote on Monday and Tuesday in 139 embassies and consulates around the world. 426 nominees compete for 213 seats in 99 constituencies in the runoff round. Voting starts at 9 a.m. and ends at 9 p.m. according to the local time of every country. For Egyptians inside the country, the vote is to be held on Tuesday and Wednesday. The voting in the second phase takes place in 13 provinces, including the capital, Cairo. Only 9 candidate-owned seats in the first round from 2,847 candidates. Prime Minister Sharif Ismail held a ministerial meeting on Monday to review the implementation of the mega national projects. The meeting also covered measures to reduce the budget deficit. The Prime Minister said that the government is focusing on means to improve the standard of living for citizens and provide basic commodities in acceptable prices. He added that controlling hiking prices is a priority for the government. Arab League Secretary-General Nabil Al-Arabi agreed on Monday to intensify cooperation and political consultations between the Arab League and the African Union over facing challenges in Africa and the Arab region. This came during a meeting with African Union's Commissioner for Peace and Security, Ismail Sharqi. Following the meeting with Al-Arabi, Sharqi said the meeting also focused on recent developments in the Middle East and current tensions in Africa and the Arab world. Sharqi also noted that they also reached a joint vision for dealing with such crises as terrorism and security problems in Somalia, Yemen, and Libya. At least 23 fighters were killed in the fighting between the Kurdish-led alliance and the rebels, who include Al-Qaeda Syrian affiliate Al-Nusra Front, on Monday. Extremist and US-backed alliance of Kurds and Arabs have fought deadly clashes in Syria as the almost 5-year-old conflict draws in more local and international players. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said that at least 23 fighters were killed in the fighting between the Kurdish-led alliance and the extremist rebels, who include the Al-Qaeda Syrian affiliate. 15 fighters from al-Nusra and its allies were killed Sunday, along with at least 8 members of the Syrian Democratic Forces dominated by the Kurdish People's Protection Units. The clashes in the northern province of Aleppo began Thursday when the extremists attacked posts belonging to Jaish al-Thawar, an Arab rebel group allied with Kurds. The assault near the Turkish border region of Azez prompted sporadic fighting that drew in the SDF and also saw al-Nusra and its allies fire rockets at a Kurdish district of Aleppo city. Syria's Kurds have long had tense relations with parts of the armed opposition, particularly its hardline elements. The minority never joined the armed uprising against President Bashar al-Assad despite having been oppressed by his regime. It has refused to allow rebels to stage operations from Kurdish-majority regions from which the regime withdrew in 2012 and has focused instead on building political and security autonomy. The Kurds accuse Turkey of backing some of Syria's extremists, and Ankara has often warned it will not allow the establishment of an autonomous Kurdish region on its border. However, the YPG, the main Syrian Kurdish armed group, has played a key role in fighting the Daesh group in north and northeast Syria. It has also allied with small Arab rebel groups like Jaish al-Thawar and had recently announced the Syrian Democratic Forces Coalition, which groups the YPG with Christian and Arab Sunni Muslim forces. The German government is planning to send up to 1,200 troops to help in the fight against Daesh terrorist group. Defense Ministry spokesman Jens Flossdorf said Monday that the figure would be an upper limit for the number of troops needed to provide support for and operate reconnaissance aircraft, tanker planes and a warship. The cabinet is due to agree the mission's mandate Tuesday and put it to Parliament for approval. German troops won't actively engage in combat. Officials rejected any suggestion that Germany might cooperate with troops loyal to Syrian President Bashar al-Assad in the fight against the militants. 3 Saudi border soldiers were killed after exchanging fire with enemy elements trying to cross the border from Yemen to attack 2 watchtowers. The attack occurred on Sunday evening in the Harat district of Jizan. Saudi Arabia has been fighting Houthi forces in Yemen for 8 months and has led a coalition of Arab states in a military campaign to drive the group from the capital Sana'a. Several dozen soldiers from the kingdom have been killed in clashes along the country's long, rugged border with Yemen. U.S. President Barack Obama will meet Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan on Tuesday at the international climate talks in Paris. Obama earlier on Monday met with Russian President Vladimir Putin as Ankara and Moscow remain locked in a dispute over the downing of a Russian jet last week. A White House official said U.S. President Barack Obama pushed Monday for a de-escalation of a furious war of words over Turkey's downing of a Russian warplane. Obama called for an easing of inflamed Russia-Turkey tensions in a closed-door meeting with Russia's Vladimir Putin on the sidelines of a climate summit in Paris. Hours earlier, Turkey sent back to Russia the body of a pilot killed when his plane was shot down by the Turkish Air Force on November 24th for allegedly violating its airspace on the Syrian border. One of the Russian pilots aboard the downed plane was shot dead in Syria after parachuting from the burning aircraft, while the second was found safe and sound. One Russian soldier was killed in a rescue operation. Putin and his Turkish counterpart, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, have been locked in a furious war of words since the incident, and the Kremlin strongman rejected the Turkish leader's offer of face-to-face talks on the sidelines of the climate conference in the French capital. Obama also offered the prospect of rolling back sanctions if Russia fully implemented peace accords signed in February over the Ukraine crisis. The Minsk Accords set out a lengthy political roadmap to resolve the conflict in the east between Kiev and pro-Russian rebels, but have been delayed into next year due to wrangling between all sides. The Kremlin confirmed in a statement that Putin and Obama had met for half an hour in Paris without providing further details. The European Union vowed Monday to work for Middle East peace, even though Israel suspended it from the diplomatic process over the bloc's decision to label goods imported from Israeli settlements. European Commission Foreign Affairs spokeswoman said that when it comes to the Middle East peace process, the EU continues and will continue to work on this in the quartet with partners. The EU is a member of the International Quartet along with the United States, Russia and the United Nations that conducts diplomacy with Israel and the Palestinians in a bid to end their decades-old conflict. Israel's foreign ministry said Sunday that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ordered suspension of diplomatic contact with the institutions of the European Union and its representatives on this issue. Pope Francis made a historic visit to the last remaining Muslim neighborhood in Central African Republic's capital on Monday, a move that opened up a part of the divided city. The visit was a bold move by the Pope, who traveled into the most volatile part of Bangui in his open-air vehicle. Pope Francis had insisted on coming to the PK5 neighborhood to appeal for peace in a country where 2 years of Christian-Muslim violence has forced nearly 1 million people to flee their homes, including thousands who have been living in a camp at the airport amid the wreckage of retired planes. The chief imam at the mosque, Tidiane Musa Naibi, thanked Pope Francis for his visit. The Pope removed his shoes, bowed his head and stood silently at the mihrab, or area of the mosque that faces the holy Muslim city of Mecca. The Pope's visit to the mosque marked the highlight of the three-nation African tour, with previous stops in Kenya and Uganda. And former Burkini Prime Minister Rochmark Kabore appeared to have a strong lead on Monday as results poured in from an election to choose the first new president in decades in Burkina Faso. Provincial results from around 41% of the West African country's communes showed that Kabore had 54% of the vote against 29% for Zéphirine Diabre, a former finance minister. Kabore was Prime Minister and President of the National Assembly under longtime leader Blaise Compaoré, who was toppled by an uprising in October 2014 after ruling for 27 years. Diabre was Minister of Finance in the 1990s in Burkina Faso, an exporter of gold and cotton, but largely impoverished before stepping down to go into opposition. 8 people were killed and dozens injured by Boko Haram militants at the weekend in northeast Nigeria and southeastern Niger in deadly raids that saw houses burnt and villagers kidnapped. The attacks were in Bamburatai in Nigeria's Borno state and in the Difa region of Niger, while there was another raid in Gulak in Nigeria's Adamawa. Boko Haram hit-and-run raids, a trademark of the militant group, have declined in recent months in the face of a sustained Nigerian army counter-offensive in rural areas. Nigerian army spokesman Colonel Sani Osman confirmed the attack and said they were shooting indiscriminately and throwing explosives into homes. An attack by Ugandan rebels in the restive east of the Democratic Republic of Congo has left at least 24 people dead, including a United Nations peacekeeper. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon condemned the overnight attack in troubled North Kivu province, blamed on Ugandan rebels of the Allied Democratic Forces, and called for the perpetrators to be brought to justice. Spokesman for the UN mission in DR Congo said that in addition to the peacekeeper, 12 rebels were killed, along with 4 Congolese soldiers and 7 civilians who were hacked to death with machetes in a hospital in the town of Iringiti. 3 opposition lawmakers were arrested in Kosovo on Monday amid chaotic scenes in parliament filled once more with tear gas in a fresh protest against an accord with former master Serbia. Opposition MPs have been disrupting the work of Parliament for 2 months by releasing tear gas in the chamber each time it tries to sit. They are demanding the government revoke a deal brokered by the European Union to grant minority Serbs greater local powers and the possibility of funding from Belgrade. They also oppose a border demarcation deal with Montenegro. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is due to visit Kosovo on Wednesday in a gesture of support for its development as an independent state. The British Museum is planning its first major exhibition of underwater archaeology, with a showing of artifacts from two of Egypt's sunken cities. Officials said Monday that the 6-month exhibit, set to open in May, will contain 300 objects from cities that have been submerged at the mouth of the Nile River for more than 1,000 years. The museum said the items have been unearthed off the coast of Alexandria in Egypt over the past 20 years. Earlier, attempts to find articles from the cities of Thonsi, Heraklion and Kanompos, which were swallowed by the sea, had failed. The finds at the two cities are transforming the understanding of the relationship between ancient Egypt and ancient Greece. The exhibit